Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining the BEST session. I today am going to talk a little bit about a new project I'm starting. My goals here are to explain to you why I've chosen to do this, because it may seem a bit crazy, introduce what I've done so far, and most importantly, I want to get as much feedback from the community as possible to steer this project going forward. A little bit about me. I did have a photo of me as a child, but I capitulated and removed that at the last minute next to my weather station. I've been a weather nerd my entire life, also a technology nerd my entire life. So it probably makes sense that I ended up being an instrument scientist in my career. I've worked on lots of different instruments, from drones as an undergraduate student, dual polarization radar as a PhD student, a little bit of crowdsourcing, supervising master's students that I'll talk about in these slides. During that time, I've used drones to calibrate radars, and then I've also worked on a postdoc with some satellite machine learning as well. And in doing this, I managed to get a lot of field campaigns done, which are always great fun, a lot of stress, but great to network with people and learn about different perspectives. So I think I've been on the Pickering project in the US, the WestCon project recently. I did the Distrometer network around the UK when I was a PhD student. So I've had a lot of exposure to different instruments and what it's like to deploy these instruments in the field. And what it all comes down to really is being able to accurately capture the processes in the atmosphere. And one of the nicest ways I've seen to demonstrate this is this plot from Orlansky in 1975, which shows the different processes. They might be a bit small. Digital fonts weren't an important thing back in the day, but you may have seen this elsewhere, which is that the different processes in the atmosphere, they follow similar temporal and spatial scales. So you get this diagonal line when you compare the spatial scale on the y-axis and the temporal scale on the x-axis there. And if we want to capture new processes in the atmosphere, we need to increase both the temporal and the spatial resolution simultaneously. So, to borrow a term from Humfeline, we're about to enter the heterometric age, where numerical weather prediction models, which is ultimately the purpose of everything we do, to try and improve the predictability of these processes and therefore increase the ability for people to make decisions to save to protect property and lives. So on this plot, I've overlaid the different resolutions of current models, and then I've also included the potential Met Office heterometric model coming up soon. And you can see that they're starting to encroach on more and more atmospheric processes. And you can also see that these have been designed to follow that temporal and spatial resolution quite well. If we then look at some surface observation networks, which is the focus of this particular talk, of course there are lots of other instruments as well, but to keep this legible, I've only included the surface station networks. You can see that there's a good capturing of different processes there, but if I flick back and forth between where the models are now and where they're going, and where the surface networks are today, they don't capture the same processes exactly. There's also a little bit of disparity in it. They often observe quite well on the temporal scale, but they lack to capture the spatial scales as well. So this is what we call the observing gap. It's a term we all like to use quite often. There are many observing gaps, but this is just the one I'm focusing on for this particular project. So how can we improve that gap and have more observations that can fuel these increasingly high resolution models? Because the resolution of these models is increasing a lot faster than the resolution of our observation data sets. So as we've heard about elsewhere in this session, there's an approach to use crowdsourcing data. There's tons of research has been done in this area. I'm just showing a couple of examples here. The Met Office Weather Observations website, as we heard from Matthew earlier. There's also a study in the UK with vehicle data and crowdsourcing those observations, which is shown on the right-hand side there. And then this, on the left-hand side, was a student I supervised during my PhD, where we looked at the NetAtmo dataset specifically. So a lot of the time was spent on actually being able to get that data from NetAtmo, put it into a nice NetCDF format. So standardization of these formats is a big thing. We couldn't just immediately start using the data and actually characterize the quality of those data sets, which again, is a second step. Ideally, we want to just use these data sets, but first we need to get the data, put them in the right standards, include metadata. Then we need to determine the accuracy of the instruments themselves, because often the manufacturers will just quote the actual chips in the sensors, not the whole device accuracy, because they don't have a motivation to go and do that work, to go and compare those instruments at the instrument level. They just want to sell the instruments themselves. They don't care about the application so much for these sort of personal weather stations. And then you need to look at the siting of the stations as well, which most of the time you don't know anything about where these stations are sited, so you just have to trust that the installer knows the rigorous 3MO standards that we want to adhere to, but often the case that's not done. As Matthew mentioned, we also saw in our study some greenhouse users like to put their sensors in there. And then in terms of maintenance and calibration, it's basically non-existent for these personal weather stations. I think a lot of the hobbyist enthusiasts would like to have their stations. They know it's important. They try and maintain their stations as well as they can, but calibration services are not within reach for personal weather station users. There's also another approach to use images. These often are opportunistic, so sometimes they are deliberately deployed cameras, but most of the time it's traffic cameras, so you don't have control over the specific camera that's deployed. You don't necessarily have control over how that camera operates, how it takes images, what exposures it uses, and so you have to deal with a lot of disparate data in terms of just the resolution of the image, the amount of sky that's captured in that image, or the scene that's captured. You don't have control over that either. The cameras can do weird things, so you have to do a lot of filtering, and again, getting the data is hard, putting it in the right standards is hard, then filtering the data is hard, and you can be thrown off and be given a lot of red herrings along the way, which makes it kind of difficult to do good science. There's also the issue of class imbalance or long-tail data sets, where some of the really rare things you want to observe, for example, noctilucent clouds, they are unlikely to be captured unless you have a massive, massive data set. And a lot of the research is limited to a single country. So we need to take a global perspective on this. So last month, I decided to start my own company, and I can explain offline why I think a company is the best way to approach this issue. I have a lot of opinions on that, but I've removed that from this talk because I could be talking all day otherwise. But just to summarize all those things I've just described on the left, the problems, there are some fairly easy solutions to people like us in the industry or in the field that you can use to say, what should we do to resolve these issues? I should have said actually, the issue we found with the NetAtmo stations is that their response time, because they focused on making it look nice and be reliable over time, the sensors are so embedded that their response time is 12 minutes for temperature and even longer for humidity. So having a very dense network at 2 kilometers on that process graph I showed at the beginning, the issue there is that you're not capturing the sub-mesoscale in the temporal space because it takes so long to respond to any changes. So we can have aspirated sensors. It's fairly easy to increase the response time, but having an aspirated station also increases the accuracy. We can do long-term intercomparisons because we're all very good at that in the field, and then we can send corrections out to stations if we learn more later on. We can offer very clear guidance to get as close as possible to the WMO site installation conditions. That's not done currently. We can try and make calibration a bit more affordable and a bit, reduce the friction on personal weather station owners to improve that and have local repairability as well. And then for the image side, we ideally want an all-sky camera, which you may have picked up already from the title of this talk, but having the whole sky image, and ideally a little bit more than that so we can see the ground a bit as well, gives the same perspective to any AI techniques as a meteorological observer on site would have. Then we can quite easily do the metadata standards and create netcdf or buffer files. That's within our capability as observational scientists. And ideally we'd want some context from other sensors. If you've just got an image, you want some other input as well, like temperature, humidity. So you really want a weather station and the camera sited together and co-located to be able to do different things. And even the ability to pull in other data sets like humidity profiles, because then with images you could do atmospheric motion vectors from an estimated humidity profile.
2 minutes, man.
Okay, I'll have to go a lot faster. So, I have designed and created this weather station that I'm going to be selling through this company. To summarize the features, it's got an all-sky camera. I'm going to show you some images from that shortly. It's fairly easy installation with a single cable. You cannot power this thing with a solar panel yet because it'd be quite a large solar panel. But I've tried to design this to be fairly easy to install. It's got the standard things: pressure, temperature, humidity. I've got an electrical engineer working on the sonic anemometer, and I would like to do rainfall with an acoustic approach plus the images, so combining those two together. In terms of just the sky camera, it's actually, compared to the sky cameras that academics or industry would buy today, it's pretty good. It's on par with the all sky cameras that you can get already. So some of the potential applications of this: contrail detection and attribution is already a big field, because it turns out that almost half of the atmospheric forcing from aviation industry is just from these persistent contrails. So you can see in this image, contrails have turned into a persistent cirrostratus layer, and it's quite shocking how impactful that is. And aviation industry are trying to avoid these by just changing their flight paths, and that would avoid a lot of their contribution to global warming. I'm going to whiz through all of these things, but there's a huge list here, and you may have your own ideas as well as to how these images could be used with the application of AI. But at the moment I'm focusing on building the framework and the system to have these instruments out there, and we can always, over the air, push software updates to the device to add these features. So the way I'm approaching this is a version for academic and industry will be available first. I'm happy to talk about that now, and it will have all the highest grade features, have the image standards that we all want to work with, and live output of data. And then eventually I would like to be able to offer this as a personal weather station under £1,000, which is fairly competitive with high-end weather stations. But first I need the funding from selling to academics and industry to get the certifications that you need, which is another reason why this has to be a private company. So if you're interested, you want to engage with this project, then you can scan that QR code there. It's also available at the end of the talk, but I'm happy to engage with the community on this, and I really want a lot of feedback. So just a quick video here showing the first deployment of this instrument on the TMEC campaign. I actually did this last week. I flew out to Italy for 24 hours and installed the station. So that's what it looks like in the real world. That's the power over Ethernet cable coming out the side there. And it's a fairly easy install because of the way it's been designed. So that is summary. I've just got a video there of the first sets of images. The reason it looks jittery is because every 5 minutes it's taking 3 photos 15 seconds apart, and that gets you the motion, but without a ton of data to deal with. So you can get everything you need, but at a 5-minute increment. But yes, I would like as much interaction in the community. Please tell me, is this a bad idea? Am I wasting my time? I will be very thankful later if you know I've missed something, and this is not a good thing to do. But yeah, thank you very much.